Hi folks, Forris Day Jr. here. Today on Rolling Tape, we talk to author John Yorke about his book, Into the Woods, a 5-act journey into story. Now, let's roll tape.
This episode brought to you by Spoof Dance Film Festival. Make parody commercials and bring the funny.
Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about the difference of the 5-act structure as opposed to the common 3-act structure.
Well, if I may, I'll start with telling a story. Years ago, I was running a TV channel in the UK, and I was working with a then largely unknown director called Paul Greengrass, who then obviously has gone on to much bigger things since then. And we were making a film together, and he rang me one day as I was on my way to set, and he said, "We've got no 5th act." And I went, "Oh my God, yes, you're absolutely right. We've got no 5th act." And then I thought, I have no idea what he's talking about at all. And I realized I couldn't even describe what an act was. And that sort of began my exploration, which very quickly became, well, Syd Field, Robert McKee, everybody else talks about 3 acts. Why did Shakespeare write 5 acts? And I couldn't find any answers that felt plausible. So I thought, I'm just going to find out myself. And that's really what led to writing the book. What I discovered fundamentally was 3 acts and 5 acts are identical. You know, they are pretty much the same thing. You just have 2 further act breaks in the middle of the old traditional 2nd act. Why? Well, traditionally in Shakespearean times, it was because the duration of the average play was 3.5 hours at least. Large part of the audience had to stand up. It was performed in daylight. They were, and largely each act then became. It sounds slightly good, but the duration of the human bladder and the ability to stand for a particular amount of time. So fundamentally, act structure invented itself around human biology. To some extent. And then what was more interesting is when Shakespeare then started to perform inside, the King's Players formed and moved into interiors. The plays were lit by candles, and of course each act became the length of a candle, so they could then light a new candle. So fundamentally, that's why Shakespeare wrote in 5 acts. What's the difference between 5 acts and 3 acts? Well, as I said, there's no difference, but what fascinated me was the more you look at 5-act structure, the more it started to answer for me what was a really important question about all those screenwriting books, which had always frustrated me, which is everybody tells you that there's got to be an inciting incident on page 24, whatever. Nobody tells you why. And without the why, academically, you can't take it seriously. It has no rigor. It has no purchase. In university circles, they just laugh you out the house. You have to prove it. So what 5-act structure started to reveal for me was the underlying reason why structure exists and why it is the shape it is.
Where did you come up with the names of your acts? Like the name of the book is Into the Woods, which is actually one of the acts, correct?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I started to realize was that every story had a fundamental shape, which, you know, it's not a new idea, but it was to do fundamentally with the journey of the character from the beginning of the story to the mid of the story, the midpoint, obviously. And I became more and more fascinated by why this story seemed to occur all the time in fairy tales. And of course, you know, the common fairy tale motif that we've read thousands of times is someone slightly neurotic, dysfunctional, lives in the village, goes on a journey into the middle of the woods where they discover a dark secret. In the middle of the story, they discover that secret, and then they take that secret home, and that gives you the second half of the tale. And you saw this very particularly in Shakespeare. You know, the first half of Hamlet is who killed my father. The midpoint of the story, Act 3, Scene 3 of Hamlet, is the discovery that Claudius killed your father. The second half of the story is the journey back out of those woods, which is, what am I going to do about it? So fundamentally, it's, you know, it's just a nice metaphor that stories use all the time. What's interesting is the more you look, the more you see this journey into the woods motif again and again and again. It's not the only way of doing it, but.
Right. So if a screenwriter, say, has a screenplay written, would it benefit them to go back and kind of look at this 5-act structure if they're struggling with their screenplay?
Well, what's interesting for me was, I mean, I've taught screenwriting for a long time in the UK. I set up the BBC Writers Academy, which ran for 10 years. And when I started teaching 5-act structure, it raised quite a few eyebrows, because everybody said, well, you know, either there's 3 or there's none. But what was really interesting over time was seeing that my students actually found it much easier writing 5 acts than 3 acts, because they had, you know, if each act has a turning point at the end of it, you've got more turning points. If you create the turning points as you're plotting, you have a much easier journey to go on. You're joining more dots together, so it's easy to follow. But you also, it gives you the shape of the story, which is the journey from, you know, the village to the heart of the forest and then back again.
Okay, I get it. It's you can actually take your story, and in any 3-act play, you could or 3-act story, you could actually find these 5 points.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you take something that's traditionally thought of as 3 acts, like Jaws, you know, exactly halfway through Jaws, Chief Brody goes out to sea and, you know, overcomes his fear of water for the first time. You know, what's interesting, again, you go back to Shakespeare, it's not just Hamlet. Exactly halfway through Macbeth, Macbeth kills Banquo, but Fleance escapes. I am steeped in blood so far that returning were as tedious as to go on. There's no, it's that no going back thing. You see, you exactly halfway through The Godfather, Michael shoots Sollozzo and McCluskey. You know, it's a classic midpoint, but what's interesting is Michael has gone on this journey into the woods. He discovers the secret, the thing missing himself in the middle, you know, the character, the thing that will overcome your character flaw. The second half of the story is how he learns to use that and deploy it. So if all characters have a flaw, the 5-act structure reveals that exactly halfway through the story, you discover, I mean, Christopher Vogler would call it the elixir, but it's, you know, the thing that heals you for the first time.
Okay, where can folks get this book?
It's available on Amazon in the States, probably in other book sites as well. It's available pretty much on most good booksellers. It's been out in the States for about 3 or 4 months now, I think. It's published by Overlook. And, you know, I'm really keen to hear what people have to say about it.
Cool. And you're in London, and you mentioned you teach screenwriting. If somebody's in London and wants to contact you, can they do that?
Yeah, sure. I have a website. If you're John Yorke Story is the name of the website. It's johnyorkestory.com. There's loads of information on there. There's online courses. There's lists of when I'm appearing to give talks. I do quite a lot of public speaking about this kind of thing. Not just screenwriting, incidentally, because obviously the application nowadays is advertising, business, speech writing. They all sort of fall into the same thing, really. So I use these tools a lot in those persuasions, and it seems to be very popular and very successful.
I'm thinking actors could actually use this methodology of thinking about their character in a movie.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, what's also interesting is I direct occasionally, and I find as a director, it's incredibly helpful when you're choosing how to interpret the scene. So giving actors advice. So the actors just as easily can do it themselves. But, you know, what's interesting is how you can chart how an actor changes, how the internal conflict changes as an actor in each different stage of the story. So if you take, again, classic example, Michael in The Godfather, you know, there's a hint of menace at the beginning, but he's 90% good. At the end, he's 90% really bad with a hint of something else. They're exactly halfway through where the need overcomes the want for the same time. That moment, you see it really clearly in The Godfather. When he shoots Sollozzo and McCluskey, you can see the old guy is battling with the new guy, and you see that internal conflict, that look on his face. And that's how you play it. And you know that's how you play it because that's where it is in the structure.
Wow, great advice. This is, I really think this is really a great way to look at things as actors, even directors, anybody making a film, I think can really benefit from this, this thought process of the 5 acts.
Yeah, well, it's all Shakespeare. It's not, well, it's Terence, to be honest. It goes all the way back to the beginning. But it's just fascinating that I think we tend to think that Syd Field in 1979 started all of this. He really didn't. What I tried to get in the book is the whole history of, amazing books about screenwriting and playwriting before that, going back before La Josegri to William Archer in 1910, and also other books of the very beginning of silent filmmaking. There's a lot of stuff about it trying to articulate. This is it. So this is my attempt, standing on the shoulders of those giants, to kind of take the debate a stage further.
Awesome. Thank you, John, so much for joining me today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Very nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you too also. That's John Yorke, author of Into the Woods, a 5-act journey into story. Thank you for watching this episode of Rolling Tape. You can subscribe to our channel for filmmakers if you'd like updates as to when new videos get released. We love to hear your comments. If you have any comments, feel free to do that below and like the page, and please share it also. Thank you. I'm Forris, and this is Rolling Tape.